The Forest Service made a decision. Irene was a turning point. The response would be new. Tunnel Brook Road would be decommissioned. The goal was not to fix nature, but to fix what man had done to it. They would attempt to set the floodplain up for a gradual return to the way it was before the road was first built a century ago. It was courageous. It was controversial. Was it right? The scale and complexity of restoring the Tunnel Brook floodplain were at a level never before faced by the Forest Service, and funding was limited. Per standard policy, the Forest Service solicited public feedback on the decision. They also brought in partners to provide broad strategic input, diverse professional expertise, and additional financial resources. This would make the project more efficient, impactful, and reflective of the forest's multi-use mission. One of the main goals of the project was to bring back the natural health of the Tunnel Brook aquatic system. And in New Hampshire, there's no greater expert on the way mountain rivers should be than the wild eastern brook trout.
Brook trout is our native species here in New Hampshire, our cold water species. Prior to sort of the heavy logging, fish could travel anywhere. There were no barriers. They could move up and down tributaries to spawn. Once we started logging, we opened the streams up and they warmed up. So as far as brook trout goes, often the temperatures would get warmer than they could tolerate. So they would not move around the main stem, they would hunker down in tributaries. Once we started crossing the tributaries with roads and putting in culverts that were often undersized, just the stream channels would end up overtopping the culverts, and on the bottom side, the downstream side of the culvert, they would create perched conditions. So at that point, fish couldn't move back up into the tributaries, so they were stuck in the main stem, which often meant that it was temperatures too warm for them to survive. So if we want to grow the base of our fisheries, which is wild fish, we really need to reconnect the system so wild brook trout can survive.
Removal of culverts was one step in allowing the Tunnel Brook floodplain to reclaim its natural function. But there was another.
Historically, there was a lot of woody debris, large trees that would fall into the rivers and provide some structure and provide some diversity of habitats and help the river establish a more meandering, dynamic form.
So that ideal aquatic habitat for trout is this mixture of riffles and pools, and that you have some wood in the stream that provides shade, and it's this complexity in a stream that makes for the best aquatic habitat. When it's just a cleaned out channel and it's nothing but rock and riffles, there isn't really a place for fish to rest, to eat. They're constantly fighting the current.
Would also help slow down rivers and acts as a filter in floods, keeping outside sediment from filling in the riverbed and changing its course. Clear-cut logging in the early 1900s removed wood from the rivers and eliminated mature forest from riverbanks. Without wood to fall into the water, White Mountain streams became quicker, straighter, shallower, and more prone to erosion. The forest we have in the White Mountains today is young. As it ages, it will naturally contribute wood back into the area's rivers and streams, and these waterways may begin to resemble their previous form. But seeding rivers manually with large wood would hasten the process.
I believe that that's the key in this, is to increase access to the floodplains, slow the water down, and using large wood and natural methods to do that works really well, as opposed to hardening stream banks. The goal is to let the stream get back to a point where it's functioning the way that it wants to restore itself.
In some areas, Tropical Storm Irene took care of this seeding herself.
Storms such as Irene, they caused a lot of devastation to infrastructure, but by eroding out those steep slopes, they brought a lot of wood into these rivers. That wood will create habitat for the native brook trout. And when that storm came across the entire White Mountain National Forest, it was creating these new habitat features at very large landscape scales, something we could never do with our small habitat scale efforts in the past.
This is a good example of where we're letting nature take its course. You can see behind me the slumping bank that we're basically going to leave that. Over time, the edge will erode, the trees will fall down. A little bit downstream, we have some trees that are about to fall into the brook. And ultimately, the bank will reach a stable slope over time. We can let the brook return to the condition that it was before a lot of heavy logging happened in the 1800s.
The Forest Service worked with its partners to determine where human intervention was needed and what kind. After a bidding process, they hired an engineer to design a plan for the site and a contractor to execute it. This included putting wood into the stream, securing some banks with riprap, removing culverts, recontouring parts of the eroded road, ripping the road to reveal the organic material beneath the fill and gravel, and then starting at the top of the road and working back out, covering the road with natural materials. Work on the road began in the fall of 2014, took a break in winter, and resumed in spring, finishing in the fall of 2015.